I write to you now, but I do not write from my room, with a bed so soft and a window so bright. I do not write from my home, with couches so comfortable and food so good. Oh, food, how I miss it. Water, too. If I could get one drop, oh, how I would thank God. Well, I'd thank someone for it, anyways. I do not write from my treehouse among friends so dear and chirping birds so near. I do not write even from the world you live in right now. No, I write from a place much, much worse. It's ironic, because during my last moments in the world, I couldn't imagine any sort of place worse than the place we call Earth. I thought such a place couldn't possibly exist. How wrong I was. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Patrick, and for you to understand my train of thought, I'll need to take you back a little. Back to the world of God. Your God, no longer mine. Put me on. Oh, the 80s, what a time to be alive. Great movies, great music, somewhat, great friends, great family, great house, great life, Sorry, I'm rambling. 11 years old, that was me, living in a suburban home with my mother, Sarah, my dad, Vincent, my asshole 13-year-old twin brothers, Darren and Bryce, and of course, my 5-year-old sister, Nancy. Come to think of it, I wonder how she's doing right now, sweet little Nancy. She was always so precious, so innocent. I hope what we went through together never changed that. Anyhow, I can remember the day so clearly. I was playing a basketball game of 2-on-1. I was the one against Darren and Bryce. The two jerks were destroying me, of course, never hasting to shove me around and taunt me. "Patrick, you're ass at this," they would say. Well, of course I was ass. I was an 11-year-old, playing 2-on-1 against two 13-year-old boys. Actually, you know something? I'm going to stop calling them names. See, when you're on Earth, it's easy to call your family members names and quarrel with them constantly. Where I am, though, you'd give anything just to hug them for 5 seconds and tell them how much you love them. Oh, sorry, I'm rambling again. Well, soon enough, our mother called us in, as we were having some guests over that night. Our new neighbors. The new neighbors in question were the Hofmeister family. Up to that point, all I had heard my brother say about the Hofmeisters were things like, "They're creepy as hell," and "weird-ass people who gotta go." I didn't share these opinions, and they seemed like okay people to me. Nonetheless, the Hofmeisters came over that night. The family consisted of 3. First, there was 60-year-old Eileen, a skinny woman with short gray hair, always wearing black dresses. Next, we had none other than 60-something-year-old Leo. Don't really remember that bastard's age, nor do I care to. Also extremely thin with a long nose that would make the pasty white guy on the Pink Panther show jealous. Then there was David, their 11-year-old insecure adopted son. I'm pretty sure Leo and David are in the same place I'm writing from right now, but I'm not certain. See, we don't really get to speak with anyone else here. Anyways, it was quite an eventful evening. Eileen and Leo had tea with my parents while Darren, Bryce, David, and I hung out in our treehouse playing cards. In the treehouse, I started to get to know David a little better. I must say, though, he seemed a bit on the weird side. He was pretty awkward when it came to discussing things such as where he moved from or what life home was like. Still, he was a nice kid. Just really shy. Later that night, when the sun went down, my brothers had already gone home, and David and I were walking down our street lamp-lit road. That's when he invited me to his house for a bit. It was a Friday night, so I figured it'd be okay. Let me say this. His house was big. It was the biggest in the neighborhood. Down at the end of my street, sitting high on a hilltop as if it were better than all the others. Behind it was a large field that eventually merged into some woods, which lined the horizon. Entering David's house, we walked into his kitchen, where he told me to take my shoes off so as not to upset his parents. I heard some footsteps upstairs, and so I figured his parents must have gotten back from my house. We sat down at his counter, eating yogurt, with David continuing to dodge my questions about his home life, or just his life in general. All I knew was that he was adopted. Soon enough, I heard Eileen upstairs. "David, come upstairs, please," she said. David told me to stay put, as he'd only be a minute. And just like that, he was gone. I sat alone in their kitchen finishing off my yogurt cup. I decided to get up and look around a bit to keep myself busy, while David was upstairs doing whatever the hell he was doing. Looking at the fridge, I got a look at some of the pictures that were magnetized to it. These included family photos with the grinning faces of Eileen and Leo, and the frowning face of David. Why did David look so unhappy in all of these? Oh, and another thing, there was a photo on their fridge of some kid sitting on the floor of what looked like a cellar, and just staring up at the camera with a blank face. Strange. I then walked over to a shelf in their living room, which was stocked with framed photos and figurines. Lots of self-portraits here, including one of Eileen, her expression blank, eyes looking very cold and lifeless. For some reason, it kind of reminded me of this portrait I'd seen once of the famous cowboy named Buffalo Bill. The same sort of stare and expression and whatnot. Anyways, sorry, I don't even know why that came to mind. I started looking at some of the figurines on the shelf. A Mickey Mouse doll, a monkey doll, this one creeped me out, and a pentagram necklace. Oh, and there was also a crucifix necklace, but the cross was upside down. What idiot messed that up? I thought to myself. I then realized that David had been gone for a while, and I was getting a little bored with looking at people's decorations. I decided to go upstairs and find them. Walking up the stairs, I began to hear some weird noises coming from one of the other rooms. It sounded like chanting, and as I got to the top of the stairs, I confirmed that it was. I looked down the upstairs hallway of the Hofmeister home and saw that one of the rooms had a light on inside. The door opened just a crack. As I walked toward the door, I could clearly hear Eileen and Leo chanting in some weird language I'd never heard before. I slowly crept towards the room, a decision I regret to this day. I pushed the door slightly open, just enough to see Eileen and Leo on the floor on their hands and knees, bowing down to something that was just out of my view. I didn't dare open the door any wider than I already had, even if it meant satisfying my curiosity to see what in blazes they were bowing down to. From my point of view, I could see a small cauldron filled with a steamy liquid. Leo was blowing cigar smoke and spitting rum into this bowl. The whole atmosphere in the room was different. I don't really know how to describe it. It was like I could feel the presence of someone else in there, but I couldn't see them. And then I saw David in the back corner of the room, curled up in the fetal position, bawling his eyes out. He looked more terrified than anyone I'd ever seen. Up to that point, now is a different story. David's terror only grew when his mother, if you even want to call that awful witch such a thing, stormed over to his corner of the room and grabbed him by the wrist, pulling him up off of the ground in an attempt to get him to bow down to whatever they were bowing to. I could see fear grow when he watched Leo pull a rooster out of a burlap sack and chop its head off in a brutal animal sacrifice. Then his face went white with horror as he realized how much trouble he was in, when piss began running down his leg and onto the floor. That did it. Eileen began slapping David over and over and over again, angrily screaming at him, "You never, never, never do that in front of the beast," she screamed. The beating eventually stopped, and David was just a heaping mess in a puddle of his own tears and urine. This was when I decided that it was a good idea to get the hell out. I turned to exit, but in my haste I knocked over one of their many picture frames that lined a desk upstairs. I winced when this happened, knowing that it was about a 99.99% probability that the devious couple down the hall heard it. I rushed down the stairs as quick as I could, nearly tripping myself. I didn't care, I just wanted to get out. Still, poor David. I wished I could have done something to help. Grabbing the door handle, I prepared to make a hasty exit out of the front door of that dreaded house. Then I stopped dead in my tracks. Holy shit, please tell me. Yep, my shoes were still in the kitchen. I ran for dear life towards the kitchen, locking onto my shoes like a missile. I grabbed them. Yes. Hello, Patrick. No. I looked up to see Eileen, standing on the upstairs balcony, looking down over me with an overly friendly expression on her face. I was frozen in place. Do I run? No, that'll just look stupid. Also, she'll know I saw what those creeps were doing up there. Hey, I managed to utter out. I didn't realize you were still here, Eileen said, in a much too friendly manner. Oh, yeah, sorry. No need to apologize, but it is getting quite late. You should get home. Don't need your parents coming over here now, do we? No, we don't, I thought to myself. I managed to stammer out some stupid reply before saying goodbye and rushing to their front door, bursting out of it. I'm never going back there, I thought to myself. If only that were true. As I ran home, I looked back at the house, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. In one of the bedroom windows was Eileen, just standing there, staring at me. When she saw me look, she raised her hand and waved. That was it. She knew what I saw. Damn it. Well, I ran home as fast as my feet could take me. I immediately told my brothers, told them about the beatings, the chanting, the cauldron, and Eileen repeatedly addressing someone or something in the room by the names The Beast and Lucifer. Well, my stupid brothers proceeded to spread the story around the whole entire school until everyone knew. Everyone knew that David's parents were the freaky witches at the end of the street. Exaggerated and blown out of proportion, the story spread like wildfire. David refused to talk to me, knowing it had to have been me who spread the rumors. I felt horrible for him, but I didn't know what to do. I was too afraid to get the police or child services after what I saw at that home. I was too young to know that was what I had to do and that it wasn't a choice. I tried to push the whole thing into the back of my mind. That was until Halloween night, a few weeks later. Good old Hallows' Eve. It was one of my favorite holidays. That Halloween night, I was doing what every kid should be doing, trying to pack as much candy as humanly possible into one pillowcase in one night. My friends and I were trying to hit all the local neighborhoods so we'd be able to mow down candy for months. But my plans were ruined when we ran into my brothers and their devious, loudmouth friends. My brothers took me aside and told me I had no choice but to show them the window of the room I had seen the Hoffmeisters doing their deeds in. There was no arguing my way out of it, and I soon found myself back at that dreaded place. My brothers, their friends, and I stood in the Hoffmeisters' yard on the side of their home. In the driveway were moving trucks. I wasn't surprised. Those people had been humiliated. I was actually really happy these creeps wouldn't be living down the street from where I would sleep anymore. My brother Darren confirmed that they were moving away because of the rumors. Well, before I knew it, My brothers were forcing me to climb a tree to get a better look into the window in the side of the house. They wanted to see if there was anything batshit crazy that would be visible in it. And of course, being the pushover I was, I climbed that tree. It seemed like all was going well, until the light in the window shut off. This was the first sign that something was wrong, but before I could get down from the tree and tell my brothers to piss off, we all heard the front door open. Of course, my brothers and their friends took off, leaving me up in the tree alone. Eileen must have heard them because the next thing I knew, she was prowling the side of the home and examining the muddy footprints left by my brothers and their friends. This is it, I thought. I'm going to accidentally snap a branch or fall or something and she's going to catch me. But by some miracle, Eileen didn't see me up in her tree and went inside. Well, I hightailed it out of there, leaving my pirate hat and part of my Halloween costume lying on the ground in their yard. I never wanted to even look at that damn house again. I sprinted down my street and through my neighborhood, and all the way down to the schoolyard, where my friends and I agreed we'd meet up after my little brother's schemes. And to my utter dismay, my friends were nowhere to be found. All I could say at that point was that my brothers had better still have my damn candy in their possession. I looked around the schoolyard a bit more. Nothing. Not a sign of my friends. It must have been pretty late at that point. There weren't even trick-or-treaters on the streets anymore. I knew my parents were going to kill me, so I started to head home. A walk home on Halloween night was the coolest thing ever. It was peaceful, spooky, and unsettling, all at the same time. I kinda liked that creepy feeling. It was what gave Halloween its charm. But I don't really like the feeling of terror. And kind of like the terrifying feeling that came over me when I noticed that I was being followed by Leo Hoffmister's pickup truck. Great. Behind me were Eileen and Leo. Leo, of course, being the lapdog that he was driving. Eileen was sitting in the passenger seat. They knew. They knew I had spread those rumors. Who else could have? No one. I was their only visitor in their new home. I ran as fast as I could down the street, their old blue pickup truck continuing to cruise after me. I eventually veered off the sidewalk and into the woods. I ran faster than I ever had in my life that night. Dashing through the woods, I looked back over my shoulder to see their truck, which was now parked on the road next to the woods. Holy hell, I thought. I'm dead. These people are nuts. Unfortunately, looking at their truck parked, I didn't see the fallen tree trunk in the middle of my path. And as you probably guessed, I tripped over it, knocking every last bit of air out of my lungs when I hit the ground. I crawled, gasping and wheezing for air. And the next thing I knew, the menacing figure of Eileen was standing over me. She looked so frightening in the moonlight, her gray, stringy hair being illuminated as the rest of her face remained dark and hidden. Even more frightening was when she held out my pirate hat and dropped it onto my lap. Great. That was strike 2 for sticking my nose where it didn't belong. And somehow I got the feeling that I wasn't getting a third. "Aw, Patrick, you took a nasty fall," sneered Eileen. "And let us take you to our new house and take care of you there. We'll make you feel healed and new." I pleaded with her, telling her that I was fine and I needed to go home. Of course, she didn't listen. The witch clutched my wrist and dragged me out of the forest over to their truck. I was dead meat. I was so frickin' dead. Well, I would have been if it hadn't been for a passing neighbor who caught the two in the act of forcing me into their truck. Eileen and Leo managed to bullshit their way out of the situation before getting in their truck and quickly driving away, leaving me behind. I went home and told my parents about the entire ordeal. The cops were called, yet after several days of searching, they were stumped as to the location of the Hoffmisters. According to them, they weren't at their old house. nor had they been in their new one. No record of apartments or hotel rooms were on file either. Those demon-worshipping, child-abusing scum had vanished off the grid. I was fine with that and decided to try to get on with my life, hopefully never even having to think about the Hoffmisters again. However, it wasn't long before I began noticing some weird shit going around in my neighborhood. What do I mean by that, you ask? Well, first off, there were a couple of instances where I would see a kid on the street, walking up the road in a trance-like state. And where did they walk to? Why, none other than up that damn hill and into the dreaded Hoffmister home. And keep in mind that I was paranoid at the time, and my bedroom window looked right out onto the street, so I was the only one noticing this stuff, at least the only one in my home. I tried telling my parents, but they were just annoyed by it, and telling me to quit letting my fears get the best of me. I still haven't forgiven them for it to this day. Then again, all I want right now is to tell them that I do forgive them. The strange occurrences then began to take an even scarier turn. One night, I woke up to hear the whispering of my little sister, Nancy. I got out of bed to have a look. As I walked down the hall toward her room, I began to make out what she was saying. Things like, "Uh-huh," and "Okay, I'll go." I opened her door just in time to see her standing on her knees in the bed, staring out the window. But that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was seeing a scrawny, female shadow being projected onto Nancy's bedroom wall by the moonlight. The second I called out to Nancy, the shadow seemed to scurry off. I rushed over to her, asking her who she was talking to. My little sister hadn't the faintest idea of what I was talking about. I told my parents, and this time, my dad jumped out of the bed at the prospect of someone standing outside of Nancy's window, but he went outside to find no one. Well, I began to run my mouth again. You'd think I would have learned the first time around, to my brothers. Darren and Bryce, along with their friends, started to develop a newfound interest in all this Eileen talk. Something about that creepy place at the end of the street amused them, gave them a rush. They loved that type of stuff. Another thing to know about Darren and Bryce was that they had a knack for sneaking out of the house on Saturday nights, something my parents hated, but never really took enough action to prevent. And sure enough, my brothers and their friends snuck out one Saturday night to check out the old Hoffmister home. This time, though, I wouldn't accompany them, but I sure came to know about it, because after my brothers went missing that night, one of their friends, who was smart enough to get out of there early on, told me about it. The police went over to the Hoffmister home, a search warrant and all, to investigate. They found nothing there. Nothing. But as usual, I continued to be the one making the terrifying discoveries. This time, it was a VHS tape that I found sticking out of the VCR in my room one morning. Popping the tape in, the first thing I saw on the TV screen was a static shot of a cellar. The cellar was so dark and dingy looking, almost like a dungeon. And suddenly, the camera began to jiggle around a bit, and whoever was picking it up pointed it at none other than my brother Darren. Darren was tied down to a chair, unconscious, looking bruised, battered, and abused. Boo! The loud yell from the camera person jolted Darren awake. The camera person was Eileen. She began to laugh sickly as Darren came to his senses, immediately beginning to cry. Who the hell would do this to another human being? That was my brother. I watched in horror as she continued to verbally torment Darren, eventually getting physical with him, smacking him in his face, his chest, and eventually his groin area. This woman was a sick, filthy freak. It wasn't until I saw Eileen begin to pull a sickle out of her pocket that I shut the tape off. Part of me wanted to go on. I had to know if Darren was dead, but couldn't watch. I couldn't bear to witness my brother get tortured like that. I rushed upstairs to my parents' room, leaving the VHS and the cassette player. But my parents were gone. They'd vanished. Oh shit, am I next? Well, when I walked downstairs, I stopped dead in my tracks on the stairwell. My blood ran cold as I noticed Eileen Hoffmister in my room, carefully removing the VHS tape from my VCR with latex gloves. She caught my stare. I swear the second we made eye contact, my heart skipped a beat. She grinned at me and waved, saying, "I'll be back for you two tonight." And just like that, the witch climbed out my window and was gone. I rushed to Nancy's bedroom, now frightened out of my wits. Oh, thank God Nancy was still there. She was sleeping soundly. That is, until I woke her up. I ran in screaming and crying, probably scaring the poor girl to death. I didn't tell her about the videotape, I just told the police. That night, our neighbor Betty, a frail old woman, babysat us at our home. No one had a clue where the heck our parents were. Outside of our home were 2 police officers keeping watch over the house. And Betty was always a great neighbor, and such a nice old lady, the nicest woman you'd ever met. I'm sure she's in heaven right now. If she didn't get to go to heaven, well then I don't know who possibly could. Anyways, I was pretty antsy that night, even with cops guarding our home, and I unfortunately was antsy for a very good reason. When the sun went down, I heard our back door open and close. Was it my parents? I suddenly got very excited, rushing to the door to see them. However, all that was there was one person's muddy footprints on my floor. Something wasn't right, but no one could have gotten inside our home, could they? The cops were outside. I rushed upstairs to get Betty. Running into my parents' bedroom, I heard the shower running. Banging on the door, I called to Betty to try to get her attention, but no answer. Then I realized that nobody showers with their hearing aid in. Oh no. That's when I heard Nancy scream downstairs. I rushed down, really not wanting to go into her room, but I knew I had to. When I got to her room, yeah, you guessed it. She was gone. Window flung open. Where the hell were the cops? Taking matters into my own hands, I got my shoes and ran out the door. Running down the street, my eyes adjusted to the darkness just in time to see Nancy entering the forest, the same forest that lies next to the hill upon which the dreaded Hoffmister home sits. I called out to her desperately, but she was in a trance, just like the other kids I had seen. But no one would believe me then. Mustering up every ounce of courage I had, I ran after Nancy as she disappeared into the darkness of the woods. I ran deep into the dark forest, my feet making loud crunching noises on the gravel path beneath me. Catching up to Nancy, I pleaded and begged for her to come too. She couldn't snap out of it. I began pulling her away, but she continued to walk deeper into the woods. Then, to make matters worse, I spotted Eileen, who was about 30 to 40 feet down the path from us. I couldn't snap Nancy out of this damn trance. I'll never forget the way her eyes looked, hypnotized and dilated. It reminded me of the trance that the snake Kaa from the Jungle Book put people in. Out of pure desperation, I reared back and slapped Nancy in the face, finally snapping her out of it. She had no idea what the hell was going on. She just knew to run from Eileen. Eileen immediately broke into a run after us. I'd never seen a woman in her 60s run that fast. And faster we ran. We were getting away until Nancy's nightgown got caught on a tree branch. I tugged and tugged at her nightgown, desperately trying to free her. But Eileen got closer and closer, snickering sickly under her breath. When Eileen got within about 15 feet of us, Nancy's gown finally tore away from that damn tree branch. We darted to the exit of the woods, rushing out onto the street. I looked back over my shoulder just in time to see Eileen turn around and disappear into the darkness of the woods. We looked around on the street trying to find the police car that was supposed to be guarding our home. When we finally found them, they didn't even realize we were missing. The morons were smoking freaking Cubans instead of guarding our home from kidnappers. Unbelievable. I had never felt so neglected and unprotected in my life. My parents were gone, and now the police weren't even looking after me. The idiotic officers went and got Betty, driving the three of us down to the police station. And finally, a place I'd be safe, right? And trying to explain to the cops that my sister was placed under some kind of voodoo hypnotism spell was like talking to a brick wall. And some cops are so ignorant, not open-minded at all. That's something I don't miss about Earth. And people in authority were such douchebags. At least Betty agreed to stay the night there with us. See what I'm talking about? Nicest lady you'd ever meet. At some point, I fell asleep in the police station, and so did Betty and Nancy. What we woke up to was not at all what anyone ever wants to wake up to. Outside of the station, a roar filled the air. The roar was like nothing I had ever heard. That roar sounded like it came straight from the mouth of hell. The screams of policemen filled the air outside as we listened, scared for our lives. It wasn't until the roaring died down and the screaming stopped that we dared look out the window. And let me say, it wasn't a pleasant sight. Dozens of bodies were just scattered all over the parking lot. And here we were, tucked in a room in the back of the station, helpless. Nancy, Betty, and I crept down the halls of the station trying to find an exit. We passed an office just in time to get a look at one of the computer monitors, one that had CTV footage being fed to it. What we saw on the monitor was shocking. Eileen ripping a side door of the station off of its hinges. What was even more shocking was her face. Her eyes were demonic, her skin rotted and scarred like a zombie. Her teeth looked grotesque, as if she had meth mouth or something. Why the hell did she look like that? Now, I know the answer. She was possessed. That sick witch had willingly conjured up a spell to get herself possessed, just to get her hands on us. She ripped the door off of its hinges, rushing down the hallway towards us. She had us cornered in the office, and Betty, oh God, poor Betty, I couldn't believe my eyes. Eileen just picked her up by the throat, taunting her. It wasn't until Betty began to utter the Lord's Prayer that Eileen was sent into a fit of rage, pinning Betty to the wall and tearing her limb from limb, right in front of Nancy and me too. Looking back, I can't even believe a 5-year-old girl was forced to watch something so awful. I had never seen anything so terrible. Of course now, in hell, I've seen it a billion times. But after Betty was slowly disemboweled, Eileen collected Nancy and me. Leo drove up to the police station, and into the blue truck we went. No neighbor to save us this time. Before I knew it, I was back at the awful place known as the Hofmeister home. No furniture this time, no creepy portraits, no lights on. Just an empty shell of pure evil. Eileen and Leo took us into the living room, where they began to bicker with one another. Leo wanted to have his fun with Nancy, but Eileen told him to wait. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wanted to get up and rip his head off, if only I could have. To this day, I wish I could have beat the hell out of that sick bastard. During this, I started to wonder where David was, probably meeting the same fate my brothers and their friends did. And my parents, oh, please tell me they didn't too. Leo eventually got impatient with Eileen, telling her he was going to get what he wanted for a change. He turned to look over at my precious little Nancy, grinning. "Come here, sunshine," he exclaimed. The rotten creep threw himself upon her. I rushed at him, attempting to stop him, but all I accomplished was getting a backhand to the face. When Eileen intervened, telling him he needed to wait, she received a punch to the jaw. Well, that was a horrible idea. Did that moron forget his wife was possessed? Eileen grabbed Leo, picking him up by the back of his neck. Nancy and I took our chance and ran away. Of course, the front door was right in the path of Eileen, so we had to run deeper into the house to find another way out. I looked back over my shoulder just in time to see Eileen begin to bite down hard on her husband's face, chewing it like a dog on a bone. Leo's cries of pain were both horrifying and reassuring to me. He deserved what he got. Nancy and I rushed through the house, trying desperately to find a way out. Why'd that house have to be so big? It was like a maze. And the fact that we could hear Eileen's demonic growling as she desperately tried to relocate us, well, that didn't help either. But finally, we found a window that looked out over the side of the hill. I quickly unlocked it, hearing Eileen's footsteps grow nearer and nearer. There was a screen on the window, and I reared back and threw my hands into it, tearing it, guiding Nancy out, all the while listening to the haunting sounds of Eileen's feet hitting the wood floors. As Nancy jumped out, I yelled at her to run. I didn't have to tell her twice. As I began making my way out of the window, I suddenly felt the hand, or claw, of Eileen grab my shoulder. I screamed out, but no one was coming to help. Eileen picked me up with the strength of an Olympic strongman, carrying me down to the hallway and over to the basement. No, please no, I thought. Not the basement. Please, not the basement. Well, basement it was, as Eileen flung open the door and carried me down into the musty cellar. She got to the bottom of the stairs, clutching me in her arms, and a light flicked on. Immediately, a grisly figure was displayed by the dim light of the basement. It was a 7-foot-tall statue of the devil himself, complete with ram horns, ghoulish eyes, sabered teeth, forked tail, and hooked feet. This was what they were bowing down to that night. It must have been, but now it was in the basement. Eileen plopped me down in a wooden chair so that I was face to face with this horrible statue. She tied me down. This time, it really is it, I thought. Eileen then pulled out a black book with some sort of satanic symbol on the front of it. I tried begging and pleading with her, telling her I was sorry for the rumors I spread. I even offered to tell the whole town that I was lying, that the tales were made up. Why did I even bother? Eileen was having none of it. I then began to cry, asking her why she had to kill my brothers and my parents. Once I said this, Eileen developed a confused expression on her face. "I did what to them?" she asked in her deep demonic voice. Did you kill my parents?" "Patrick, Lucifer does not want to see people die. He wants to see them in hell with him." "What?" I asked in a sheepish tone. "Why, you could say your family is more alive than ever now." And that's when the awful truth was revealed. Out from the dark corner of the basement, behind the statue, came my parents, my brothers, their friends, and those kids I had seen walking into the home. David was also among them, but they walked in a zombie-like manner. When they all stepped into the light, I saw into their pitch-black possessed eyes. Those horrible eyes were not the eyes of the people I knew. They all looked dirty and abused, and their skin looked like it had begun to decay. Eileen grinned with glee at this sight. "You see, Patrick, Mommy and Daddy are here. Say hi to Mommy and Daddy." I looked at my parents, desperately trying to get them to respond to me, but they were gone. It was an awful feeling. "Hail, Lucifer!" shouted Eileen. "Hail, Lucifer! Hail, Lucifer!" repeated the hypnotized people in monotone zombie fashion. And then Eileen looked at me. "And now, you'll join them." Eileen opened the black book and began reciting incantations. The zombies, the people I once knew, encircled me and began reciting with Eileen. I pleaded with my brothers, with David, with my parents, but it was no use. They were lost. And suddenly, the statue's lifelike lips began to quiver intensely. I thought I was dreaming. It's funny, when something like this happens, all you think to yourself is, "Holy crap, is this really happening?" The statue's eyelids began to quiver as well, before opening to reveal pitch-black eyes. The eyes began to glow a vibrant red, just as the statue's jaw began to unhinge. And then, a loud roar erupted from the statue. This roar was even worse than Eileen's demonic roar, louder and much deeper. White mist in the shape of a human skull started to rise up from behind the statue as Eileen shouted in English, "Beasties hungry." I screamed a blood-curdling scream as the mist made a beeline for me, shooting straight into my mouth and down my throat. I screamed as I felt the evil spirit make its way into my belly, wriggling around in my insides. My high-pitched scream slowly began to grow deeper and deeper, turning into a demonic roar. This is what it felt like to become possessed. I was Eileen's now, but even worse, I was Lucifer's. The last months of my life were agonizing as I lost myself, lost who I was as a person. I became the evil, zombie-possessed slave of Eileen Hoffmeister, working to serve the devil himself. It was like a dream. I was in control of my actions, but I wasn't at the same time. My slave labor ended when my body began to slowly decay. That was when Eileen disposed of me, likely going on to replace me with another poor child. And that's why I am where I am now. It doesn't make sense to me at all. I don't deserve to be in this place. Sure, I lived out the last moments of my life serving God's adversary, but it wasn't my choice. Why, then, am I here? Some sort of mistake? Did heaven run out of space, or does everyone just go here? Are my parents here too? My brothers? Perhaps that's the worst part. I'm not even granted the answers to these questions. I just live in total darkness and extreme heat. Regardless, I know it's Eileen's fault I am here. It's all Eileen's fault. It was Eileen who stole me from heaven's true light. And that is why, from hell, I write. "20 years came and went since that awful night my brother went missing. Oh, what an awful time it was. Thanks to Patrick, I escaped that dreaded house. But I was scarred for life. I couldn't get it all out of my head. The fear, the death, that roar. I still hear that roar every night when I lay to sleep. That deep bellow, erupting from the mouth of what seemed to be a human, but was only a body-shaped demon. The worst were the eyes, those horrible, beady, pitch-black devil eyes. Believe me, I check my closet every night to see if they're there. I can't even hear the word devil mentioned at a church service without having a nervous breakdown. And by God, whenever a friendly old man shows me an ounce of compassion or affection, I simply want to vomit, trying to shut out horrible memories. But the one memory that I hate most of all, the one that I think of every single time I lay my head down on the pillow to go to sleep, is the photograph. The photograph that the police found at the Hoffmeister home the night my brother went missing. That awful black and white picture of poor Patrick, sitting on the filthy floor of that godforsaken cellar, pitch-black eyes staring up at the camera. My name is Nancy Williams. I can tell you right now, things haven't gotten any better. The night Patrick and I were chased through the Hofmeister home by that awful witch Eileen, I escaped. Patrick didn't. Soon enough, he and Eileen, along with the rest of her possessed slaves, my parents and other brothers included, disappeared without a trace. I was left alone, my family gone. The police had no idea where Eileen was. All that was left at the house was Leo's dead body and a demonic statue. Oh, and that horrible photograph. Well, soon enough, I was sent away to live with my aunt, Cynthia. Being the sister of my mother, she was also mourning. But the two of us got through it together. And Cynthia helped me get through the sleepless nights and the bad dreams. Of course, I slept in Aunt Cynthia's room until I was 12 years old. And even when I began sleeping in my own room, I slept with the door wide open and the light on. And since I was traumatized, I grew up as a pretty solitary child. I never had many friends in school, but I excelled in my studies. This is what got me into Harvard. It was at Harvard that I met a graduate of the school, Jackson, who was visiting to give a speech. We hit it off quickly, and soon I was in love. After many dates with him, things got pretty serious. Graduation arrived, and before I knew it, I was living in California, just 30 minutes away from Jackson. The two of us dated for a couple of years, and for the first time since I was 5 years old, I was truly happy. I was almost able to forget about the night that my life was ruined. It was a wonderful time. There was only one thing that was slightly wrong when I began dating Jackson. Of course, growing up traumatized, I always had nightmares. But when my relationship with Jackson started, so did a recurring dream that I'll never forget. It would always start in the exact same way. I would lie in a bed in the middle of the night awake. But it wasn't my bed. It was always one inside of a large house, the same one every time. The bedroom window always had the same view. A large field with some woods that lined the horizon. A full moon was in the sky every one of these dreams. Perhaps that was the most peculiar part. That everything was the same every time I had the dream. In the dream, I'd always sit up in the bed before getting up and walking over to the door, which was always closed. Opening it, I stepped out into a dark hallway. At the end of the hallway was another bedroom door, mirroring mine. Walking down the hallway, I'd always walk past a staircase, but the staircase would be barricaded by wooden boards, as if that part of the house was off limits. All I could do was travel down the hallway to the other bedroom. Walking over to the other bedroom door, I'd always begin to hear the muffled sounds of music coming from inside the room. The music was almost like smooth, romantic jazz music. Stretching my hand forth, I would grasp the doorknob and open the door. As I opened it, a bed came into view, sitting in the back of the room. The bed wasn't empty, though. A frail, naked, scrawny old woman always sat on it, her face reddened by the absence of light in the house. This woman faced away from me, and facing her was a shadowy, humanoid, horned creature. The room was pitch dark, so I simply could not make out the faces of either one of them. Finally, the woman and the horned being would begin to embrace one another, falling onto the bed in a sexual dance. Once they began to do this, I'd wake up, dazed and confused. And yeah, you'd better believe I kept in mind just who that scrawny woman from my dream reminded me of. But enough about my dream. Soon enough, my 25th birthday came. I was just getting off of work when I looked down at my buzzing phone. A call from Jackson. What does he want? I thought. We agreed on meeting at his place at 7. Candlelight dinner and everything. I picked up the phone. Hello? Hey, Nancy, said Jackson. It's me. What's up? I replied. Listen, you're gonna kill me, but... Oh gosh, but what? I may be a little late tonight. As a typical girl, I became rather annoyed at this notion. It was my birthday. Who did he think he was? Are you kidding me? I replied in a whiny voice. Listen, I'll be home by 8. Something just came up at work that I really need to take care of. Is it more important than our celebration? I replied. Of course not, but there's no way around it. 8 o'clock, I promise. There's a key under the mat at my front door. All right, I'll wait for you. Love you. All right, bye, he said before hanging up. Wow. We'd been dating 3 years and he couldn't even say the L word yet. Unbelievable. I headed on down to Jackson's estate. Jackson had done well for himself, I'll give him that. Part of what attracted me to him was his success. Some may call me a gold digger, but humans always reach for the strongest branch. That was something I couldn't get out of my mind in church services. The animal instincts that, deep down, kept us from truly being what God seemed to want us to be. Walking into Jackson's house, I soon made myself comfortable in his living room, flipping on the television and stoking his massive fireplace. It was about 6:30 when I got there, so I began the task of finding a TV show that would keep me entertained until Jackson's 8 o'clock arrival. Drifting in and out of sleep, I was awoken by a strange noise in his house. I shrugged it off for the first time. That was something I always did. Hearing something in the house while being alone had always been a problem for me, but this time, I heard it again. And again. What the hell was going on? It was as if there was someone inside the house moving things around. There was no way my mind was just playing tricks on me, was there? I didn't think so. I got up to find the source of the noise. Walking down one of the halls, I began to hear the sound again. It was a weird squeaking noise, as if someone was playing with a mechanical pencil. Was it an animal? Beginning to hear grunting noises, I was convinced it was. That is, until I realized that the grunting noises were human. I continued to walk down the hall until I got to the cellar door. Pressing my ear against the door, I began to hear the voice more clearly. It was female, definitely female. A raspy female voice. I was completely freaked out beyond belief. Now, I know what you're thinking. Did she go into the basement to look? Absolutely not. I pulled out my phone and immediately called Jackson. I told him about the strange noises coming from his basement. He immediately seemed taken aback by this and proceeded to frantically tell me not to go in there. That's when I saw it. That door was bolted shut, but the screws were coming loose. That's what the squeaking noise was. Whoever was inside that basement was patiently picking at the other side of the door, pushing the screws out one at a time. I wondered who on earth had the strength to do that, and before I knew it, I was watching the last of the screws inch its way out of the side of the door, falling and joining the others in a pile on the hardwood floor. As Jackson frantically yelled my name over the phone, whoever was on the other side of the door yelled out, "Nancy?" The door flung open and slammed into me, knocking me to the ground. I knew I recognized that voice. Standing in the doorway was that scrawny, rotting, corpse-like witch named Eileen Hoffmister. She was shackled, but still, unfortunately, able to walk. It was like a nightmare, but it was one I couldn't wake up from, no matter how desperately I wished to. Eileen did not look happy to see me in the least. She looked even worse than she did the last time I had seen her all those years ago. Her skin was decaying, sickly green in appearance. Her hair was thin and stringy, and her eyes were now a milky white. Most of her teeth had fallen out, and the ones that hadn't were crooked and rotten. Eileen? I stammered out. Eileen didn't even answer. That monstrosity of a woman lunged at me, throwing herself on my back. I desperately tried to crawl away from her, trying to escape. That rotting person smelled worse than any open sewer one could possibly imagine. Eileen began to attempt wrapping her chains around my throat. I used all my strength in my body to prevent this from happening. "Now I'll take you to my world, Nancy," said Eileen. Eileen got up and began dragging me by my feet toward the basement. Her strength was incredible. It was because she fed off of the devil just like any witch would. And before I knew it, I was being dragged down the stairs of the cellar, the witch flung me onto the hard, filthy floor. Looking up and coming to my senses, I immediately got a look at her living conditions. Bowls with food and water were put out for her, and the floor was littered with chicken bones and other rotting food items. I can't believe my luck. It looks like I'll be able to get you after all. I looked up over my shoulder just in time to see Eileen start to lunge at me again, but this time, a pair of hands came up from behind her and grabbed her shoulders. It was Jackson. He grabbed her by the shoulders and threw her to the ground, throwing herself on top of her in an effort to restrain her. "Mom, don't make me do this!" shouted Jackson. Mom? I couldn't believe my ears. Jackson's last name was Haley, not Hoffmister. How could this be? Eileen continued to struggle and growl at Jackson, nipping at his hands in an attempt to get off of him. After much wrestling between the two, I got up and began looking for a weapon, anything to bash Eileen's brains in. I looked over to the side and spotted one of her food dishes. They were glass, and perfect. I ran for her bowl, quickly dumping out the gross, slimy, unrecognizable food inside of it. It might have been feces, I'm not even sure. I broke the bowl on the ground, creating a sharp hunk of glass that could be used to kill Eileen once and for all. I rushed towards Eileen, who was still pinned to the ground by Jackson. Jackson noticed me and got up off Eileen in an attempt to stop me. "Stop! Nancy, don't do it!" Eileen, now free of Jackson's restraint, got up and rushed at me as well. I reared back, and just as she got within my reach, I blindly swung at her with a shard of glass. For a moment, everything just seemed to freeze. The yelling stopped, and Jackson stopped rushing at me, and so did Eileen. I then noticed Eileen's throat begin to drip blood, before the red liquid fell gushing out like a river. She fell backward, and that was it. Just like that, the nightmare that had haunted me for years was defeated. Jackson fell to his knees, completely shocked. He had some explaining to do. In short, Jackson told me that he was indeed Eileen's son. He was born into her household, but was immediately miserable. His parents constantly beat him and tried to force him to worship the devil. Of course, this led to Jackson changing his name once he turned 18. He wanted nothing to do with them, but after Eileen had ruined my life and ran off with Patrick and her possessed slaves, Jackson went looking for her after hearing police reports. It turned out that Jackson knew exactly where to find her, at an old ritual site that she had always taken him to as a kid, against his will, of course. At that point, all of her possessed slaves had died off. Rather than turning her into the police, Jackson suckered her into his home, pretending that he would begin practicing witchcraft. Once he got Eileen into his home, he locked her up and began the process of trying to convert her to Christianity. He couldn't see his mother be damned to hell, no matter how awful of a person she was. Of course, his attempts were in vain. Eileen was to stay a witch no matter how great his efforts. I explained my history with Eileen to Jackson. I told him of the kidnappings and everything else that horrible hag had put me through. I also told him that I never wanted to see him again. How could I have? He was a freak just like her, keeping his own mother locked up in a basement, his murderous hag of a mother at that. In the middle of our argument, Eileen's dead body began to quiver. The two of us froze, terrified. Her body continued to quiver before beginning to violently shake. Orange light began to encircle her corpse. The two of us then watched in terror as a ghastly, slimy demon began to crawl out of the ground next to Eileen's body. Once it noticed us, its face lit up and it smiled. Its voice was surprisingly human-like. "Hello, Jackson," it said. Jackson didn't respond. The two of us stood there in fear. I began to turn away and walk towards the stairs, wanting to escape this madness, but the basement door slammed by itself before I even got to the first step. I looked back at the demon. "Oh, won't you stay? We don't get much company down there." What else could I have done? All Jackson and I could do was stand there and look at this filthy little creature on the floor, which began examining Eileen's body. It proceeded to look back up at Jackson. "Oh, how disappointing," exclaimed the demon. "What's disappointing?" replied Jackson. "You don't have your father's eyes." Jackson immediately developed an expression that was filled with disgust. "Leo's eyes? Yeah, I'm happy I don't have those. Though that rotten creep can..." "No, not Leo's. Your father's." Jackson looked confused. "Excuse me? What?" "You don't know?" Old Nick always had a thing for your mother." Jackson's face went completely white. Old Nick, that's when it hit me. That dream I used to have. It was Eileen and Old Nick, the devil. In my dream, Eileen and the devil embraced one another in courtship, but the dream never showed me the offspring. I was looking at the offspring right now. The demon continued his work, examining Eileen's corpse before dragging it down the rabbit hole with him. He then popped back up one last time, giving us a smile and a wink before descending down into hell. Jackson's legs began to wobble before he fell backward, landing hard on the basement floor. The pain he must have felt from that fall didn't seem to affect him in the least. He just stared up at the ceiling, mouth gaping open as if the whole world had just crashed down on him. And in a way, that's exactly what the case was. The questions that must have raced through his mind, mine too. How is he the devil's son? He doesn't look like a demon. Jackson's a nice guy. How could this be? Jackson simply would not respond to me, so I left. I never went back to that house, nor did I ever talk to him. Not when I couldn't sleep. Not when I began having nightmares. Not even when I began to get depressed and lonely. And not when I found out I was pregnant. The only person I ever had sex with in my entire life was Jackson, the son of the devil. My heart sank as I realized this. I was pregnant with Jackson's child, and Jackson was the devil's child. And he was also Eileen's child. That meant that not only was Eileen the grandmother of my kid, but the devil was also the grandfather. Eileen was my mother-in-law, and the devil was my father-in-law. These thoughts were the only thoughts left in my mind, racing around 1,000,000 miles an hour. I sank to my knees as I stared at the pregnancy test, and I felt my stomach. Through my fear, it was almost like I could feel my stomach getting bigger. I dreaded the day I could feel that little angel face in there kick. What could I do? Would the devil do something awful to me for getting an abortion? Could I just take my own life? If I did, would I go to hell for it? If I gave birth to the baby, would I be the mother of a demon? That last question was the only one I knew the answer to. The answer was yes. A demon was growing inside of my womb. Old Nick's grandchild was growing inside of my belly. Eileen's grandchild was growing inside of my belly too. We were all just one big, happy family. I sped down the street on my bicycle, feeling the wind rush through my hair as the sun prepared to take a dip down below the horizon for the evening. Dead leaves blew around on the road like schools of fish evading a predator, and the crisp autumn air felt wonderful as it engulfed my speeding bike and me. Being in the 4th grade in a small town in New Jersey, I loved riding my bike every day after school, especially in the beautiful fall weather. I liked doing it alone. Sure, I would get my friends in on it during the weekends, but there was a part of me that needed solitude after a busy day. During my treks around the neighborhood, I would come across something new each day. It could be the discovery that someone in my community owned a Great Dane, or that a house down the street from me was egged on Halloween night. But one day in the middle of November, I made another discovery. See, on the far side of my neighborhood, there is a road with a dead-end sign. However, on this particular day, I decided to see what was beyond it. After all, that sign didn't signify in any way some sort of end to the world. No, there was more beyond it. And on this particular afternoon, I decided to go beyond. I sped past the sign and pedaled hard up a hill. Of course, when I got to the top, I looked down at a cul-de-sac, sitting dead and lifeless. Beyond the cul-de-sac was a dense forest, but I noticed something about it. Right at the front of it was a dirt path, winding its way into the depths of the woods, just begging to be explored. Pedaling down the hill, I parked my bike at the edge of the forest and began walking down the dirt path. I strutted down the path as my neighborhood seemed to move further and further away. Deep into the woods I went, past ghastly trees that had shed their autumn leaves. The cawing of crows filled the air as my footsteps crunched on the dirt path. After a couple of minutes of walking, something began to come into view. It was none other than a small house, sitting in a clearing in this mysterious forest. The house looked like the most innocent little cottage one had ever seen. For some reason, I had the urge to walk closer to it. It had some sort of enchantment to it, one that simply said, "Come to me." I began to move towards the house, inching my way through the tall grass that surrounded the place. Suddenly, someone rounded the corner from the side and startled me, and I almost jumped out of my skin, until I realized it was just a frail old woman, hunched over and carrying a watering pot. Once she noticed me, she immediately developed an overly friendly expression. "Well, hello, stranger." I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just starting down that path. I didn't realize you lived here." "Oh, it's quite all right. In fact, I was just thinking about how much I would love a visitor." "Really?" "Certainly. Won't you come in for some tea?" I was shocked by her hospitality. I had never met someone so nice in my life. I wasn't sure about her offer, though. I told her that I wasn't sure how long I had until dark. The old woman told me I had at least an hour before sundown, so I finally agreed to come inside. I walked into the house, right behind the friendly old woman. I was immediately hit with a scent of candles and the aroma of newly baked cookies. A black cat walked out in front of us, giving me a cold stare before scampering off to another part of the home. The old woman and I entered her kitchen, where I sat down at the table as she prepared tea. "So, what is your name?" "Stella." "Oh, what a pretty name." "Thank you." I sat as she poured water into the kettle, looking out her window at that enchanting forest. I was excited about this new place I'd found. I had to show my friends around these woods. I looked back at the old woman. "What's your name?" "Eileen," replied the woman. "I like that name," I said. She smiled at me before going back to fixing our tea. The kindness that radiated from her was immense. Already, this Eileen lady was the nicest person I had spoken to in a long time. Finally, the tea was ready, and Eileen joined me at the table. We began to sip from our teacups like two British citizens. Our conversation propelled itself into the evening, so much so that it took me a while to realize that the sun had gone down. I also thought that my mother was going to kill me. "Oh, no," I said. What's the matter, dear? It's dark. My mom's gonna kill me. I got up out of my chair, ready to make a quick exit. I really didn't want to walk through those woods alone at night. Just as I got up, so did Eileen. I walked over to her and reached out to shake her hand. She gently grasped my hands in both of hers. Her hands were very cold and frail. Thank you so much for having me. Eileen suddenly developed a sad expression, one filled with disappointment and sorrow. Won't you stay a bit longer? Oh, I wish I could, really I do, but I have to get home. Oh, just a bit longer. Well, now I was annoyed. She still had my hand cut within both of hers. Whenever I tried to pull away, she continued to grab at me. Listen, Eileen, I can come back tomorrow. Please, let me go home, I said, still trying to sound as friendly as possible. Stella, all that I ask is that you stay a little longer. It's very lonely out here. She continued to grasp my hand, now a bit more tightly. I became extremely annoyed. Eileen, I really have to get home. Please let go. I jerked my hand away from her, freeing myself of her grasp. I turned away and began walking away from her, refusing to look back. Suddenly, Eileen uttered something that, a minute ago, I could never have imagined her saying, not in my wildest dreams. Get back here, you little bitch. I was shocked. When she said this, her voice sounded extremely gravelly and malevolent. I turned around to face her, my jaw gaping open at what I had just heard. What I saw frightened me. Eileen stood there, hunched over with a furious expression on her face. She looked like an angry goblin of sorts, her expression communicating to me that she wanted to rip my head right off of my shoulders. But what struck me even more than this was the large candle she clutched tightly in her hand. And when I say it struck me, I mean quite literally, because the next thing I knew, Eileen hurled the heavy candle right at my face. The candle struck my forehead, knocking me down on the ground. I clutched my forehead in pain, feeling blood begin to flow onto my hand. As I moved my hand away, I saw Eileen make a dash for me, grabbing me by my ankles. Stella stays, she screamed, before cackling aloud like a Halloween witch. Eileen began to drag me across the floor by my legs. This frail old woman had the strength of a grown man. I was astounded, and I was also in big trouble. She dragged me over to a door in the hallway and opened it. In a split second, I knew where that door led to. Her basement. I quickly began to attempt crawling away, but Eileen noticed and pounced back on me like a cat after a mouse. She started dragging me down into the basement, and I clawed at the floor for my dear life. Most of my body was now in the cellar, with only my head sticking out of the doorway. Eileen suddenly let go of my legs and ran back up the stairs. I had no idea what she was doing now. Well, before I had time to even move, I watched as Eileen grabbed at the cellar door and swung it right into my face. And the next thing I saw was darkness. When I finally came to, I was lying on the filthy floor of a musty cellar. One light was on, dimly lighting the room. My head hurt badly, and when I reached up and felt my forehead, I felt nothing but dried blood from where the candle in the door had struck me. I felt extremely weak, and it took quite a bit of strength to begin getting up off of the floor. Once I got up, I noticed something else on the floor. I screamed out loud when I saw it. Lying there on the floor was a dead body. It looked like a man, but I couldn't tell because it was so decayed. The skin was a sickly green color. The odor of the corpse began to fill my nose, smelling worse than anything I ever smelled in my life. I continued to scream at the top of my lungs, running up the stairs toward the basement door, and of course it was locked. I pounded on it, frustrated and scared out of my wits. "Let me out of here!" I screamed. And suddenly a loud male voice shouted at me, "Shut the hell up!" I immediately stopped pounding and screaming. Who else was here? I looked back over my shoulder down at the corpse. I sat with my back against the door watching it. I couldn't even stand being in its vicinity. I kept on staring and staring at this corpse on the ground. I couldn't peel my eyes away from it. It was as if I needed to keep an eye on it for some reason. But I soon mustered up the courage to look away from it just for a moment to look under the basement door. I saw Eileen's feet, and the feet of someone else, presumably the man who just told me to shut up. I jerked my head back around, looking down the stairwell to keep an eye on the corpse. And that's when the corpse began to get up. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, and I thought so for a while. But once the corpse actually got to its feet, I knew my vision wasn't failing me. It had its back to me, and I held back the urge to scream. And tears began to well up in my eyes as the corpse slowly turned around. Once it did, it gradually tilted its head upward, looking up to the stairwell right at me. Its eyes were pitch black, and its decayed mouth gave its face a toothy grin. I started screaming again, just as the decayed person began to walk up toward the stairs towards me. It walked slowly and wobbly, trying to keep balance on its decaying legs. I pounded on the door again, though nothing good could have ever come of that. After a few seconds of doing this, I gave up, and just sat with my back pressed up against the door, watching as this decaying zombie slowly made its way towards me. I felt hopeless. There was nothing I could do but watch as this thing inched its way towards me. By some miracle of God, about halfway up the stairs, the rotting person stumbled and fell flat on its stomach. Just as it began to get back to its feet, I fell backward as the door I'd been leaning against was opened. I looked behind me to see a scrawny old man standing in the doorway. Addressing the creature, he screamed at it, "Get back!" The zombie immediately put its hands forward as if to show the old man respect. And then, to my surprise, it spoke. "Yes, master," it whispered. The zombie turned away and began to walk back down the stairs. The scrawny old man then looked down at me just as Eileen walked over to join us. "Stella, this is Uncle Leo. Won't you say hello?" "No, screw off." "Oh, what terrible language for such a young girl. Sounds like you need a lesson in manners. What do you think, Leo?" Leo grinned with delight as he stepped on my wrist, preventing me from getting up. All I could do was scream out in pain. I was too weak to fight back, still groggy from being knocked out. "I think it's a very bright idea, Eileen. I think I know the best way to teach her some obedience. I say she has a little chat with Lucifer." My heart sank when I heard this. Questions raced through my mind. Did that mean they were going to kill me? They can't actually mean speaking to the devil, can they? And before I could ponder these questions, Leo called back to the zombie, whistling at it like it was a dog. "Lester, grab her!" Well, Lester immediately began walking up the stairs, this time in quick fashion as if it was scared of Leo. "Any day now," yelled Leo. The rotting Lester grabbed me by the waist and hoisted me over his shoulder. I screamed out once again as I now had the pleasure of smelling this horrible, rotting stench up close. It carried me down the stairs and dropped me down on the ground. I landed hard on my knee, and pain immediately shot up my leg. I didn't have faith in my abilities to walk at this point. When I looked up, I noticed something I hadn't had time to notice before. In the back corner of the basement, shrouded in shadows, sat a horrifying statue. It was a statue of a demon, or a gargoyle of some sort, with goat-like horns, sharp claws, and hoofed feet. Above the statue on the wall, an upside-down cross was painted. In my pain, everything was such a blur. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Eileen grab a book off of the floor in the opposite corner of the basement. Lester then stood to my left like a bodyguard while Leo took up the right. Eileen walked over to join us, opening the book and reciting words from it. The words were in another language, one I didn't recognize. As Eileen continued to chant, she gradually raised her voice louder and louder. Leo and Lester then began chanting with her. The chants grew louder still, and to my utter amazement, the lips and eyelids of the statue began to quiver. Once again, like with Lester, I hoped my eyes were playing tricks on me. And like before, I realized they weren't, as the eyelids of the statue opened to reveal pitch-black eyes. The jaw of the statue unhinged and began to open as the dark eyes started glowing a vibrant red. A roar erupted from the statue as white mist rose up from behind it. The roar was so loud, so deep, that I instinctively knew that it was not of this world. The mist drew closer and closer to me as Eileen's chants grew faster and faster until it sounded like she was simply speaking gibberish. The mist got within touching range of me and began to almost investigate me, if you will. It was almost like a snake, coiling and swaying this way and that, studying me in a way. Eileen, Leo, and Lester stopped their chanting. Eileen seemed to grow frustrated. "Why isn't he taking her? He took Lester just fine." Oh no, was I going to end up like Lester? Before I could think, the mist coiled around me and levitated me up off of the filthy basement floor. I screamed out as it carried me over to the statue. I soon found myself staring into the bright, glowing red eyes of the demonic statue, whining as its nostrils quivered. It was smelling me. I shivered as I felt its nostrils exhale onto me. And suddenly, the mist seemed to evaporate, and I was dropped onto the floor. The eyes of the statue quickly shut, as did its gaping jaws. Eileen and Leo both looked infuriated. "He doesn't want her," yelled Leo. "Can't say I blame him," exclaimed Eileen. Eileen then began to walk over to the back of the room. I watched as she knelt down to grab something. It was a red tank of gasoline. She developed a sinister smile on her face as she walked towards me with it. As she advanced towards me, Leo pulled a matchbox out of his pocket, handing it to Lester. "We'll let Lester do the honors since he's been so good," said Leo. Eileen cackled with delight as she approached me, now standing over me. Lester slowly but surely pulled a match out of the matchbox and proceeded to light it. "Well, Stella, it's time to burn bright like the stars you were named after," said Eileen. I had to act fast. Just as Eileen began to tip the nozzle forward, ready to soak me with gasoline, I reached out with my foot and kicked at the tank as hard as I could. The tank was pretty light, as it was propelled by my foot right onto Lester. Lester was immediately engulfed in flames as a match she had just lit ignited the gas. He screamed out a horrible scream as I used every ounce of strength within me to get up off the ground and make a dash for the stairs. In the confusion, I was given a head start, due to Eileen and Leo being distracted by Lester's burning. "Fire bad! Fire bad!" screamed Lester. No, I thought. Fire good. As Eileen and Leo came to their senses, they rushed up the stairs after me, but I had been given a great head start. I quickly glanced over my shoulder to see Lester flailing around wildly, causing other things in the basement to catch fire as well. I ran up the stairs and out of the basement, desperate to escape that awful place. I ran out the door towards the woods. Looking over my shoulder, I saw Leo about 10 feet away running after me. I quickened my pace as best I could, hobbling with a likely broken leg. And before I knew it, my leg seemed to fail me as I felt Leo tackle me from behind. I toppled to the ground with a grinning Leo on my back. "You're coming with us," he exclaimed with glee. I began swatting at his face to no avail. He wasn't fazed by anything I did. I began scouring the ground for something, anything to hit him with. As he started dragging me across the lawn and back towards the home, I spotted a rock on the ground. I quickly reached for it, grasping it in my hand, holding on to it for dear life. Oh boy, please let this work. I jerked my body around so I was now being dragged on my back. Rearing back, I hurled the rock at Leo, hitting that bastard right in the face. He immediately let go, clutching his face in pain. I got up as best I could, running to the forest. I ran down the path, continually looking over my shoulder. Neither Eileen nor Leo were following me. I finally came out on the other side of the forest to see my bike. Oh, my sweet bike, I thought. I mounted it quickly and rode the hell out of there. Well, back in my house, I told my parents everything, and the authorities were of course contacted. Apparently, when the police arrived at the house, the place was burnt down. No one was found there, not even Lester. I couldn't believe what I had seen. Poor Lester. That wasn't him trying to hurt me. He was a normal person before, just like me. But unlike me, the misty evil spirit likely took him, assimilating him as a slave to Lucifer. All I wanted to do was forget. After a few days, my parents decided it was definitely a good idea to move. I was with them 100%. I'd miss my friends and my neighbors. I'd miss my school, but I simply couldn't live down the street from that house. I couldn't. The night my parents told me we were moving, I climbed into bed, finally feeling safe and secure. I knew this was one of the last nights I'd be sleeping in this room. But I wished we had moved just a bit sooner, because that night, I heard a scratching noise at my window. When I turned to see what it was, I was in shock. It was a charred Lester looking through the window at me. He was burnt to a crisp. "Fire bad," he said through the window. "Fire bad."